So I heard you were looking for some new manga. Well, I have something for you. This is a brand new series called Stage S, and originally it was penned as a bit of a romance manga, right? Not all too much, but it's kind of like its tagline. So when I went into it, I was expecting as such a nice, simple romance story, and its artwork definitely reflected that. Super simplistic, very sleek lines, very pretty, right? Nothing too over the top or glamorous, but simple. Now, considering this is coming from Jump Plus, the expectation could have been anywhere. It could be the next big thing, a phenomenal, well-written romance manga, or something that pretty much bypasses a lot of the mainstream attention and becomes pretty irrelevant, quote unquote, over time. The pros and cons of the industry, right? Very quickly, I realized that this wasn't just a normal romance manga, nor is it really a romance manga in total. It's something a little bit more, and I like this appeal. I like how it lures you into the story with this false sense of security that it's going to be a pretty simple romance, but quickly starts to throw in some harsh reality, some problematic things, and a twist in its narrative and your own perspective. See, our story follows a boy known as Meguru Yukio, who unfortunately, very tragically 10 years ago, lost his parents in a car accident, and he was the only person to survive. Obviously, this has had a pretty drastic effect on him, and you can tell just by his interaction with people, how he talks, the emotions that he shows. He's very hollowed over. He's not emotionless per se, but the way he moves through day-to-day life is simple, to the point, very straight-faced, and that's about it. He's not super affectionate or doesn't really show much emotion. However, there's one individual that he finds comfort and support with, and someone that's been with him since that accident. A childhood friend known as Sara Tatsumi, and someone that he has a lot of feelings for. Now, Meguru doesn't really know how to take things further. He wants to be in a relationship with his childhood friend, as they seem very close, very understanding, and they support each other very well. But one day he would come across a snake that can actually speak, called Shirohebi, and would claim to be some sort of god, one that has to be worshipped to stay alive or relevant. Upon finding this somewhat god Shiro, they befriend each other. They find some sort of mutual agreement. Meguru pledges donations to Shirohebi, and Shirohebi can provide something in return, which is to see the future, or at least portions of it. After convincing our main character this is possible, Shiro says to Meguru to go find your childhood friend, to confess to her everything will work out the way you want it to, and you'll be really happy. And thus, that is exactly what happens. They get into a relationship. The most positive and happiest thing that Meguru has had the opportunity to experience. And as they're slowly moving forward within this relationship, the twist in the narrative comes through, and that all this happiness that our main character is feeling comes at a price, and a very hefty one. Shirohebi, our snake god that can see the future, would tell our main character that he would die very soon. And do you want to know how Meguru takes it? Pretty well, for the most part. He actually somewhat expects it, knowing that all of this happiness that he is receiving, at some point, there has to be a catch to it, right? This day would come very quickly, as we see our main character and his childhood friend, now girlfriend, enjoying themselves, confessing and reflecting within their childhood, sharing emotional moments and living their life. But Meguru realizes that he can't lead on his girlfriend, that he knows that he is about to die and wants to make it as least painful as possible from his perspective, so he calls it off. He breaks up with his girlfriend, and right after that, while sitting in a bus stop, he sees his life flash before his eyes. As an approaching car hurtles towards him, he manages to save a small child and realizes that this is his death. He wakes up, and the first thing he is greeted by is Shirohebi, our snake god that predicted this future. And of course, Meguru is stunted, a little bit all over the place. He's full of conflicting and differing emotions, and a lot of it outbursts onto his face. For the first time, you see him yell and scream and be upset by the outcome. Finally, after so many years, after all this pain that he has gone through, he was finally happy. Made such a beautiful advancement with his childhood friend, which was now his girlfriend, but it was all cut short. He couldn't experience it. Instead of getting taken to peace right away, he wants to see his girlfriend's future, just so he doesn't have to worry about her. And it would turn out within the next 100 days, she would be killed by another god. For what reason, we don't know. But this drives Meguru to change his fate, to want to help and do anything at his disposal to save her. So instead of transitioning over and going to peace, Shirohebi offers him a deal to give him a power to change fate. The future that Shirohebi could see could be altered, changed, saved, fixed, whatever it may be, but it comes at a massive price. Meguru takes it, and we've seen him reborn back into the human world with a task to kill a very, very massive god that is floating up within the sky called Kurohebi, and very quickly we see a portion of how powerful this god can be, one to be called Judgment. It starts to rain down, and these monsters start to cover Meguru, but very quickly he is very determined to save his girlfriend's life, and wield the power that is Shirohebi, that has now absorbed or morphed with his body. To put simply, Meguru is now somewhat immortal to an extent, and he's able to change and morph his body to be very dangerous and destructive, to kill anything that gets in his path so he can save his childhood's friend and change her fate, her future, with the power of a snake god running through him. So what you've just listened to is a pretty good overview of what Stage S is. But one thing that I can't necessarily visualize for you properly is how somewhat destructive it is. It's rather gritty. It does have this very simplistic art appeal to it, very fine and thin lines, not much artistic prowess that looks ultimately unique or out there. But as soon as the story starts to shift, when Meguru starts to come back to life and want to change the fate for his childhood friend, you see how gritty and dark and interesting conceptually that it can actually get. There's a scene where Meguru is quite literally crawling out of his own grave, and you can see his regenerative abilities working at its fullest. He is healing his skin and his bones, and everything is somewhat crawling back on top of him and healing itself, which I thought was very beautifully done. But also the design of these things or monsters, whatever you want to call them, seems somewhat familiar. They're not too out of control or out there, but I think with the way Meguru is framed, it somewhat slightly reminded me of Land of the Lustrous a little bit, which I thought was rather interesting, and maybe there's a bit of inspiration there, and maybe I'm just overlooking it in that sense and making connections that aren't necessarily there. So far the story is really simple, but it has the artwork to back it up in a very interesting way, and it can play on it very creatively, as we've seen the monsters with the action sequences, the powers that Meguru has, as well as the snake god. It's a nice balance artistically with all of this dark and gritty and problematic elements that ultimately portray a darker tone to the story, clashing with the simplicity of the everyday world. I'm very interested to see how far this story can actually go though, because the ultimate goal is very high, which is to kill another god, and Meguru now technically should have the ability to be able to do so, considering he is merged or combined with Shirohebi, which was the snake god that was predicting his future, and can now morph his body, which seems very inspired by Parasite, maybe? I thought it looked very familiar, and just thinking about it now, Shirohebi, the snake interpretation with it actually sitting out on top of his head, kind of reminds me of Shinichi and Migi a little bit, which is definitely kind of cute. Is it possible to kill Kurohebi, whatever Kurohebi is? We see some sort of depiction of it, which is like this big tumbling darkness within the sky. At first I thought it was like a giant snake, like a world-eating snake, which it definitely still could be, but it seems more of like an omniscient being for now, like just the darkness that is death, or the final kind of executioner. I think for a lot of people this series might be a really nice change of pace, something that isn't all too much action or battle shonen orientated, but then has a little bit of romance to support it and kind of carry it throughout it, has some rather interesting concepts that aren't revolutionary or unique in any extent, but are portrayed pretty well. It's an enjoyable read, and I'm very curious on how the story wants to change and evolve itself over time with a pretty healthy foundation that it has. Does it add more characters? Do we get more abilities? Is this more of a solo traveler journey that's one way, trying to change the fate of his childhood friend? Theoretically, he only has 100 days to do so. Is that the final goal? Will there be more past that? Will there be other things that intervene? I'm not entirely sure, but it does drive a bit of curiosity down that direction, which I think is very valuable and important if you want people to be interested or hooked onto your story. I think officially dropping 2 chapters was a smart play for them, so people can actually get their teeth a little bit more within the story rather than the singular chapter that series would drop. Is it enough for people to get hooked? I definitely think so. It gives you basically everything over those first 2 chapters and is ready to move forward. Is it interesting enough for people? That's entirely up to you. Personally, it doesn't feel like something out there that's going to blow up or take over the world or be the next big thing, but it could be a very healthy story that has a pretty good backing or following behind it. It could know its strengths. It's playing into the more romancy department, but also has that grittier, darker elements to it that feels very grounded in a sense. Even though you have a snake god that can predict the future and a main character that can warp or shapeshift his arm, but is tasked with changing an unchangeable fate. If you have read this story, I'm very interested to hear what a lot of you think about it. So far, I'm going to be keeping my eyes on it, see if it expands into different avenues and chains or evolves or grows in a nice, healthy direction. But let me know how you feel. Does it sound interesting with the description that I gave it? Have you read it? Are you interested in it? Something that you're potentially going to skip? It's probably not going to be for everyone, that's for sure, but could be something to fill in the blanks for you. With that, however, I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.